Oh,
There she is.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, my flight just landed in DC here.
Oh my goodness.
Oh.
We're glad you're here. And we are live.
Okay.
Aloha. Colin. My name is Roger Jelinek. I'm Executive Director of the Hawaii Book and Music Festival, and I'm very pleased to welcome the attendees and a very distinguished group of panelists on an issue that is on everyone's mind right now. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Christina Jedra, who is the moderator from Honolulu Civil Beat. Aloha.
Thank you, Roger. Welcome everyone to our discussion on systemic corruption in Hawaii. Like Roger said, my name is Christina Jedra. I write about corruption among other topics for Honolulu Civil Beat. And for those of you joining us, please put your name and where you're from in the chat, and feel free to post questions throughout our discussion in the chat, and hopefully we'll get those answered. I'm joined by three wonderful panelists who I'm so excited to hear from on this important topic. First, we have Doug Chin, who has worked in and around government in Hawaii for over 2 decades. He's a former Hawaii Attorney General and former Lieutenant Governor. He's worked as a city prosecutor and city managing director under Mayor Peter Carlisle, and he is currently a member of the Honolulu Police Commission. Doug has also been named one of the best lawyers in America and is the chair of this festival, so we're especially grateful to him. Ali Silvert is the former federal public defender who helped crack open the Kealoha corruption scandal. He's the author of the book, The Mailbox Conspiracy, which chronicles how the Kealohas went from Hawaii power couple to convicted criminals. And today he teaches at the Richardson School of Law and is a federal criminal law consultant. And last but not least, we have Heather Ferguson, who is the Director of State Operations for Common Cause. That's a nonprofit that advocates for government accountability. She oversees operations in several states, including Hawaii. Previously, she was the legislative director for Common Cause in New Mexico, where she lobbied for reforms to the State Ethics Commission, campaign finance reporting requirements, and voter registration. So when it comes to corruption, Hawaii has given me plenty to write about. And to just refresh our memory on some recent cases, I thought we'd go through a quick list. To summarize, Honolulu's last police chief is in federal prison, along with his wife, a former prosecutor, for framing a man for a crime he did not commit. 3 members of Honolulu Mayor Kurt Caldwell's administration are under indictment for their roles in securing a $250,000 retirement payment for Louis Kealoha. Our previous elected Honolulu prosecutor, Keith Kaneshiro, is facing federal charges that he pursued a bogus prosecution of an innocent woman in exchange for money from a campaign donor. 2 state lawmakers and a Maui County official have pleaded guilty to taking bribes from a local businessman, Milton Choi, in exchange for favorable treatment. A Hawaii Island housing official has pleaded guilty this year also to accepting nearly $2 million in kickbacks and bribes to influence affordable housing projects. And 4 employees of Honolulu's Department of Planning and Permitting have pleaded guilty to accepting bribes to speed up permits and dismiss violations. A local architect has also pleaded guilty in that case, and a 5th DPP employee will stand trial next year. So that's quite a mouthful. Doug, I would like to start with you. Why do you think corruption seems to be so rampant in Hawaii?
Yeah, without question, Christina, it is definitely there's definitely been a long string of cases that I think is showing the public that there are some very serious and significant examples of corruption that are happening in government. I have to start off as someone who formerly worked in the city and formerly worked in the state by saying that the vast majority of people who are public employees do things right, and there are so many transactions and I would say legitimate deals and appropriate agreements that follow ethical standards that occur all the time. And I only say that because I know that whenever these stories do come out, it causes a lot of cynicism about government. And I think for people who work in government, it makes them feel bad because then they feel like, they're being swept into the entire canopy of people who are performing these bad acts. Okay, I got that out of the way. Now that I've said that, I think it's very serious, and I'll tell you that having looked at I think what really concerns me when I see these things is that I've worked in these offices, so as I worked in the prosecutor's office, or I worked in the mayor's office, or I was the managing director, or I worked with corporation counsel, or I'm on the police commission. I mean, so to me, when I look at all these things and I think, okay, so this is the job I'm in, the position I'm in now, and think about how these things happen. I'll tell you why it happens. I think one big thing that impacts people is greed, right? And I think it's something that people will be very tempted by. And I think the other serious reason why something like this happens is because people have the feeling that they're going to be able to get away with it. And that's something that could be explored is why is it that they can feel that way? And I hope that this panel, and I hope that even more than this panel, I hope that the public discussion about this topic will help bring about change so that people don't feel like they can get away with something like this.
And we'll definitely touch on that later on in the discussion. Ali, your book, The Mailbox Conspiracy, demonstrates how a prosecutor and a police chief teamed up to use their authority for personal gain, in that case, framing someone as retribution for, I can't even get into it, it's too tangled. But in the process of living through and writing about those events, what did you learn about power and corruption just generally in Hawaii?
Yeah, I mean, first, I grew up in the East Coast, so people have asked me many times, is there more corruption in Hawaii than other places? And quite honestly, I don't believe there is. If you live on the East Coast or in some of major mainland cities, the corruption is rampant and tremendous. And that doesn't excuse what's happening here in Hawaii, but in context, I think we have about as much corruption as any other state. But we do have some unique issues in Hawaii that are different than the mainland states. One, we're a small island, and we have a very big government. We're the fifth state, one of the 5 states in the whole country that spends and hires as many people in government as in private business. And when you have that economic engine being the government and getting therefore contracts and unions and so forth, that really lends itself to organizations getting involved in getting money from the government, getting contracts from the government, because that's the engine that drives Hawaii. And I think that's a big source of our issues of corruption here, is that we're so dependent on government for contracts and money and expenditures that it lends itself to the corruption we're seeing.
Something interesting about every single one of the cases I listed earlier is that they were prosecuted by the federal government. None of them are local or state cases. So Doug, as a former Hawaii Attorney General, I know you prosecuted then Hawaii Island Mayor Billy Kenoi for theft, although he was ultimately acquitted. So that's an example of a local case. But by and large, it does seem like the corruption cases here almost always come from the feds. Why is that? Where is state and local law enforcement when it comes to corruption here?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think part of the reason why that happens is I think state and local law enforcement, particularly in Hawaii, but I think maybe typically around in other jurisdictions as well, they tend to focus on blue collar crime. So in other words, the reasons why people call 911 and the reasons why the police show up at a door to take down a report, those are the crimes that traditionally get prosecuted by state and local law enforcement. So I think there's kind of a culture, or if you will, in terms of how the system gets set up in that way. I think the other thing is you see it in the state statutes that we have. Like, in other words, there's no state statute that targets like specifically corruption. There's state statutes that talk about theft. There's state statutes that talk about false statements. Bribery is there, but even bribery has some heavy elements, some burdensome elements that have to be met in order to be able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think that's part of the framework that happens. And I think it's to me, it's an agenda thing. It's not really necessarily on people's minds in terms of, this is what I want to see stopped. I know for people who are listening to this panel, I'm sure they want to stop it, but I think for most people, if you took a poll, they're just saying, I want my streets to be safe, or I want to feel safe in my home. And so they might be shocked by what they're reading in the stories, but it's not necessarily at the forefront of their minds. Hopefully, the more that these stories come out, and the more that the public demands that government respond, then that'll help develop a greater emphasis and attention on this issue.
I want to pose the same question to Ali, and then I have a question for Heather. So Ali, why do you think that we don't see local and state prosecutors holding Hawaii officials accountable more often?
So my view is slightly different, I think. The state can prosecute these cases. The issue is, will the state prosecute these cases? And what we've seen in the past is, I spoke to some people who were prosecutors in the state system, and they say, the real emphasis in the state system is on violent crime, because that's, as a lawyer, where you make your name. It's what the public wants prosecuted. So a lot of emphasis in the city county prosecutor's office and at the AG's office is on violent crime behavior, not white collar crime, which is corruption. And so there's been a de-emphasis actually in the state system to investigate these cases. These are complicated cases to investigate. It takes manpower, money, and time. So it's kind of like the state system looks the other way for those reasons, to do the violent crime, which is what society wants them to do. But they can do these cases, and they should be doing these cases. We shouldn't be relying on the feds. And so we need more state people to do it. But there's a big problem. We are a one-party state. If you're going to investigate corruption, you're most likely going to be investigating and possibly charging people who are part of the Democratic Party, or people who are contractors who give money to the Democratic Party. It's just the nature of our particular one-party state. If you do that as a lawyer, you're going to put your career at risk, because you're not going to become a judge. You're not going to become a partner if you go after these people. And I think to some extent that plays into why we didn't see these prosecutions out from the state. I mean, if we look at the cases that are being brought, hundreds of people within the system must have known about what was going on, but no one came forward. And that's another issue we can talk about, why we don't have people coming forward. But we all knew it was happening, and yet the state authorities turned a blind eye to it. And I think part of the problem is political, and part of it is they have been structured in such a way they're going after violent crime.
Yeah. Heather, you've worked in New Mexico, which is similar to Hawaii in some ways, in that it's also a small state dominated by Democrats. Can you tell us about the measures that you've advocated for there to combat corruption and promote good government?
Sure. So I think we experienced many similar situations that Hawaii has been experiencing most recently. And for New Mexico, this was when we really started doing some anti-corruption work about a decade ago. But to take you further back, we actually started trying to create an ethics commission in New Mexico 40 years ago. And just to let everybody know how long of a marathon this is, we just got that passed 4 years ago. And it's because it goes to both what Ali and Doug are saying here. It is really difficult for individuals to feel like they're going to have to call out in a small society. They're going to have to call out their friends, their neighbors, people that are their close colleagues. They have to put themselves at substantial risk. And there are some steps that New Mexico started taking where, before we got to the Ethics Commission, we started chipping away at different things so that we could create greater transparency, greater accountability. A few years ago, we passed a bill that created a blackout period so that no one could contribute to anyone's campaigns during a legislative session. Then we extended that blackout period to go into the pre-filing period, because what you're also trying to do at the same time is we've got to rebuild public trust in the people that they are electing. It leads to voter apathy if they feel like, well, I'm just casting my ballot, but they're probably going to be just as corrupt as the next person. And to Doug's point, that's not what we know to be true based on our professional experience working with the majority of these people. It is more so that you have to create more mechanisms for that accountability and for the public to feel like they can't take any money during this period. So therefore, the legislation that they're working on has the appearance and has the public participation in being a clean process. So that's one step. There's many others that we can get into for solutions, but there's lots of solutions that I think the state can start lining up now to start getting to that point where building a solid ethics commission is the goal.
Yeah. No, Ali, I think one would hope that some adequate safeguards would have been put in place after the KLOS scandal, so that something like that can never happen again. I'm wondering, to what extent do you think that's happened?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's happened at all. I know the Foley Commission is working on introducing some bills, and I'm very hopeful. I hope they don't take half measures and they really go after it. But in terms of the institutions that were involved in, for example, in my case with Gerard Puana, the Police Commission, the Ethics Commission, and the Office of Disciplinary Counsel, at the time, they not only did nothing, but unfortunately, even after the indictments and after the convictions and sentences, they still did nothing. The analogy I give is we have to look at what went wrong. We have to look at why things happen. Why did we let it happen in order to fix it? And so the example I give is, if a bridge falls down, engineers come in with no preconceptions and they look and they examine why that bridge fell down. And when they're going to rebuild it, they learn from their mistakes and they build it differently and they build it to withstand the forces that cause it to fall apart. We have turned a blind eye in Hawaii to looking at what has happened, what went wrong in order to fix it. Every single commission has refused to do that. After the sentences of the KLOAs, the mayor said, we don't look back, we only move forward. Well, he never looked at it to begin with. And the Police Commission didn't examine it at the time, and they still haven't. And the Ethics Commission, which had 15 complaints against the KLOAs pending before it, simply dismissed them. And what's interesting about the Ethics Commission is their job on their webpage says that they are there to improve and maintain public confidence in government and public officials. How do you do that if you simply dismiss the complaints that are pending without any resolution, without examining what happened, and you just move on? And so this is something that we have to change in Hawaii. We have to have introspection. We have to have retrospection. We have to examine what happened so we can move forward.
Doug, I'd like to allow you to respond to that as a current police commissioner. What are your thoughts?
So first of all, I completely respect what Ali has to say. That's why I'm actually listening hard to think about, okay, what are things that the police commission, like today's police commission, can do to be able to address what happened before? Is it changes to our rules? Is it how we view, how we decide certain cases? So you've definitely given me something to think about. I think I've got for sure that I appreciate that. I think the other thing that I've seen in how, to my mind, how police commissions have changed, because I remember when I was in the mayor's office, at that time we were tasked with staffing the police commission, finding people to serve on it. And it felt like the police commission at like a decade ago, which was made up of great business people who were very sharp and came in with a lot of business savvy. It felt like they understood their role to be more of we're a civilian, we're a non-law enforcement civilian group that provides support to the police department, gives them advice, on things that they could do better. But other than that, we don't really get involved. I remember when I had to go through my confirmation to become police commissioner, that really changed. In other words, I think all the questions were, are you going to hold the police chief accountable? Are you going to be holding the department accountable? And it seemed to create more of a expectation that the commission would have like more of a checking role, more of an adversarial role in terms of how it thinks about what the department is doing and what the chief is doing. I have to say that, I think that the people who are on the commission now, I work with them, and I see that, at least from my perspective, I think they are very conscientious. We don't always agree on how we decide something, but I think they're always very conscious about, hey, the public is expecting us to be holding the department accountable. And I think we also get it in the testimony that comes in front of us all the time. I don't think the police commissions in the past received that, but now very regularly we get people who are watching our meetings who are saying, look, are you going to be making a decision on this controversial issue? We expect you to, because we expect you to be holding the department accountable. So to me, I hear what Ali's saying. I'm thinking, okay, that's actually something I gotta, think about how we can do what we can do on the commission to do better. I think it's moving in a better direction than what it was, largely because of the fact that the public has expected something different from the commission and has communicated that to us. So I think all that is good.
Yeah, I think, Doug, you raised an important point. You, if I recall correctly, were appointed around the time of the George Floyd protests. So there was a lot more pressure from the public to, promote police accountability. So I think that's right. A good point about citizen participation and the impact that can have. Ali, you mentioned the Foley Commission, officially known as the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct, which the Hawaii House convened this year after 2 lawmakers were busted for bribery. And that group has made several recommendations I want to talk about. They're suggesting reducing the cost of public records, archiving government board meetings, subjecting lawmakers to term limits, requiring certain legislative groups to abide by open meetings laws, and requiring the State Office of Elections to publish a voter's guide. I'm wondering from each of you, maybe starting with Doug, then Heather, then Ali, if you think any of those measures will actually prevent or address corruption. Doug, you go first.
Sure. I think the recommendations by the Foley Commission are excellent. It's a great step forward. Is it enough? Will it actually survive through the legislative season? I think we got to see, how much the legislature stays focused on it. And to me, I think the way that they'll be able to stay focused on it is if the public keeps reminding them that it's an important topic to them. So yes, I do think that those are helpful steps.
Heather, what are your thoughts?
They feel like they're in line with best practices that we see throughout the country. I do like those a lot. I think that I was taking a look at some of Hawaii's contribution limits that they have to some of their races. And I think that to Doug's point, there are a lot of other pieces that I think need to be considered. But if there's one thing that I have learned through working in state legislatures for the last 20 years is that we can't go in there and ask for the whole enchilada. Right off the bat, they will kick that right back out the door. So it's best to try to not, I don't consider them half measures as much as I consider them the steps that we need to take so that we start getting people more comfortable with dealing with the new process. And then we take the next step and go in a little bit deeper. And that way also some of the individuals who don't want that level of accountability will start getting out of the way too. And I think that kind of gets into a point of, in those pieces, building up greater consequences, increased enforcement abilities that we provide either the state law enforcement agencies to be able to pursue. Well, actually, that's what it would be, so that it doesn't become just the cost of doing business. If they are caught violating some of these laws, if they get them moving, then it's got to be something that is going to have a serious negative financial impact on them or impact their ability to be in elected office to begin with. So I think it's pretty good.
Ali, you said, there may be some half measures there. Can you expand on that?
Sure. I totally understand both Doug and Heather's viewpoint that sometimes you take what you can get, but I'm going to kind of step back a little bit and look at this from a trial defense lawyer's point of view, and take a kind of a different approach. And also, I'm from the 60s, so I have that kind of a background. And I'm not in government, and I've never been in government, and I don't profess to really know the workings inside and out of government. But I take a kind of different view. I think we've had enough. I think we've taken the slow approach, half measures, long enough in this state. And I think it's time for a different approach. As a trial lawyer, sometimes you do a shotgun approach. You throw everything you can at the wall, and then you find out what's working, and then you kind of go for that. But you have to throw everything at the wall first to see what can happen and what is the weak point and where you can make gains. If you cut yourself off, if you do half measures to begin with, because if you do too much, they're never going to listen, they're not going to do this, which is the way we've done politics in Hawaii ever since I've been here for 30 years. If we continue to do that, we're going to get very small incremental changes. So for me, I say, throw the kitchen sink at everybody, get the public outraged, have demonstrations, get transparency. Let's see what these legislators are actually saying and doing and voting on everything. And so it has to be an all-out approach, not only on legislation and hearing and finding out what legislators are doing and saying in response to these bills or requests, but then we have to work on enforcement, transparency and enforcement, because that's the accountability. It's one thing to say, make changes. The other hand is the hammer. If you are corrupt, if you're doing this to maintain power, not for the good of the people of Hawaii, then if you violate the law, we're going to get you.
I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up for you, Allie, here. So there seems to be some public support. And just
That's
a
right.
reminder to folks at home, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat. Doug, I have a question for you, since I think you're the only one here that's run for office. To us on the sorry, to us on the outside,
Okay.
We see these campaign finance reports, we see these thousands of dollars going from these powerful interests to campaign coffers, and we can only really wonder what kinds of promises and expectations are attached to that money. Can you enlighten us as to how exactly special interest money influences politicians? Do the donors kind of make clear what they want at the time of the donation, or do they give the money with the unspoken expectation that they'll have your ear later on?
Right. So I don't remember anyone ever saying, quid pro quo, I'm going to give you this money right now, and this is how I want you to vote. Maybe because they knew me, maybe because they knew my background. So they just, so they just didn't go there. But I gotta admit, that is the one thing, it's what I didn't like about running for office. It's this feeling of, and I think let me say this, I think that the press and the public kind of perpetuates this feeling of, the way who's going to win is who's raising the most money, because it creates a pressure. And I know I felt the pressure. You'd be thinking, gee, am I raising enough money, to be able to indicate to everybody that I'm potentially going to, that I'm a viable candidate. It's rough. Let me just say this. It's a tough industry to be in, because there is always that pressure to be able to raise money, and that's at the city level, it's at the state level, and it's at the federal level as well. I think most people who know what they're supposed to, how they're supposed to talk about it, they don't say that. They just say, we support you, we're behind the values that you stand for, and so so we want to support your candidacy. Does that translate into an audience later, or being able to meet with someone? I'd like to think that all of us would, who were in public office would just say, I'd be happy to meet with whoever and be able to set that up. I don't know. I mean, I could, because I think there is something about the system that creates this dynamic that it's not comfortable. So I think that's where one of the recommendations that, one of the topics that comes out of the Foley Commission or out of these dialogues is really a lot about limiting what campaign contributions can be. That's radical. Okay, honestly, that is a big change. And honestly, I appreciate hearing Ali, because I'm all pragmatic and thinking, what's the best way that we can be able to baby step our way into into change. Ali could be right. Because I think in order to be able to get to a place in Hawaii where we would have such a low limit in terms of what people can give, that it then wouldn't matter. You never have that concern about people's money actually dictating policy decisions. Wow, that would be a big change to the way elections are run in the U.S. and in the state and in the city. I'd love to see that. I'd love that, because I think you'd have a better candidate slate. How quickly that's going to happen, boy, I think that's up to the public. It's probably up to discussions like this to be able to make something like that happen.
Yeah, thank you for that honest answer, Doug.
Yeah.
Heather, I'm wondering what you think about this, because I know campaign finance is part of Common Cause's thing. What can we do to rein in the influence of money in politics, but also make sure that candidates, have money to buy signs and just get the word out that they're running?
Well, I think it's tough. And I think, what I've loved about reading the comments is that public outrage is the way everything gets done. And part of the reason why we ended up finally getting the Ethics Commission passed is because we had yet another Secretary of State who I think she was indicted for 65 counts of embezzlement, fraud, identity theft, all kinds of issues. And she was gambling during the legislative time, like between the hours of 9 and 5, when the legislature was in session and she was supposed to be at work. She was gambling up the road with her campaign money, withdrawing money out of the account. So when you're dealing with campaign funds and how to clean things up, there's sort of two prongs with it. One is you have to really tighten up and enhance exactly what you are allowed to spend your campaign money on. It is not on your, having your friend be your treasurer. It's not buying a jogging suit. We had a land commissioner who bought himself a new truck. I've got a Secretary of State candidate in Indiana that just did the same thing. It's not for just spending on yourself for whatever way you want to. It needs to go towards certain things. And then all of that needs to go into enhanced and more detailed campaign reporting. Then when you look at the possibilities of public financing, especially when it comes to some of these local races, I feel like that would help to really clarify things, because some of those campaign limits, what we try to look at when we look at public financing is how much money does it take to buy your attention? Are you going to keep track of every single person that donated $100 to you? And therefore, that's going to be the line out your door where you feel more compelled, perhaps, or that's their goal, is to get your attention, versus the person that gets to walk in and write you a check that for the maximum limit of $6,000 in some of these races, right? And so the more people are dialing for dollars all the time, it isn't allowing them to hear from their constituents, especially not the average constituents. I'm a single mother, and I have never once gotten a phone call from anybody trying to raise money from me. And it's not just because I work for Common Cause, it's because my bank account is not what they're looking for. And that is part of the system that we've built. So there are a few ways to do that. One is to put more sunshine on the entire process. Who's contributing, get everything reported, increase the reporting and get more detailed about it. And the other thing is to look at what public financing programs might be possible, especially when you deal with some of these local government races.
Yeah. Ali, what are your thoughts on the influence of money in politics here? What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody. The two issues for me that are primary that need to be addressed immediately, and the Foley Commission to some extent is doing it, is campaign reform, finance reform. That's number one. Money is the huge problem here. and we have to address it seriously. So I think some of the bills that are going to be submitted do address some of it. I don't think they go far enough. I think public funded campaigns is the way we have to go. I know it's going to cost taxpayers a little bit more money perhaps, but that's better than paying for rail. So, I think the public would do that rather than spend it some other ways. But it has to be coupled. You can't just do one thing. You couple it with bills that have to do with transparency. Right now, we still allow the chairs of committees to vote to kill bills in private. What happens, even with the Foley Commission's alleged recommendations, they're not addressing that. We need transparency. So you have to address this problem multifaceted. One is campaign finance reform. Another is transparency to see what's actually happening so we can vote for who it is. And you know what? Transparency is accountability. That's what it is if we can know what you're doing, then you may not do something wrong. I was thinking about this. I always do analogies when I do closing arguments. And the analogy for transparency is very simple. When our kids go to elementary school and they are given a math problem, they have to show how they came up with the answer. You just can't put 75. You show how you solved the problem so that the teacher knows the parent didn't give the answer. The parent being corruption in a sense. So here, we ask our kids to show their work. I want our legislators to show their work, show their votes, show why they're voting the way they are, explain it. And then, of course, you need enforcement. You need a powerful arm of law enforcement to say, if you step out of bounds, there are consequences. And we need to address it all at the same time. Now, I would like Heather to address one thing, because in talking to her before, I really think it's important we address who selects all these commissioners, because our process is kind of backwards and hasn't been addressed. And I know that Heather did a lot of work in New Mexico to change how, for example, the State Ethics Commission members were picked. And that's the kind of thing we need to do in Hawaii, which is right now, all of the power is to select commissioners for both the Ethics Commission and the Police Commission. Lies with the mayor. Of course, the City Council approves it, but the selection process is 100% with the mayor. We have to change that so it's spread out so different groups are appointing members, and we have to have people who are qualified. There has to be some minimum qualifications for these positions, and I know Heather can address that more fully because she actually did that.
Yeah, please do.
Thanks, Sally. So we went through a bunch of iterations, and I do think that there should be a unique approach to each state based on, or each locality based on, their makeup. I think for us, what we found was the best approach was that we had the leaders from each party in each chamber had to use a merit-based selection to determine who they were going to appoint to. This is for our State Ethics Commission. And then from that, we had 3 members left. 1 member got to be appointed by the governor also through a merit-based selection where they had to show that they had some, this couldn't just be, I made a promise to my friend, or this person feels like they would do what I want them to do on the Ethics Commission. They had to be someone who had some level of expertise that and this is a legal term that I'm sure you'll appreciate, Allie, any reasonable person would determine to be some level of expertise to serve on the commission. Then the last 2 members, though, have to be agreed upon by all of the other appointed members. And you cannot have a majority of either party, of any party, actually, on the Ethics Commission. So that also ensured that people had to go outside of their typical political spheres. In addition to that, because everyone was afraid that somehow we have same-day voter registration in New Mexico. They didn't want anyone to game the system. So you weren't allowed to change your party registration within 5 years of being appointed. You were also precluded from being appointed if you had ever run for elected office or if you had been in an elected office. We wrote a whole list of caveats of things that you could not have done that could put you into the position where you could be either corruptible or biased or part of the system. And so that was really helpful. And the other thing that we did was to try to do, an ounce of prevention, is we wrote in provisions where individuals can seek advisory opinions. And so that way they could say, before they did a bad act, they could actually run it by the Ethics Commission and say, hey, what do you guys think about me spending money on my campaign money on buying a truck? Ethics Commission would say no. Now, if you decide to violate that, they also have something to go back to, which is nice. But it also has helped to clean a few things up.
Those are really interesting ideas. I think there should be more discussion on those. Earlier we touched on sort of why corruption happens, and we mentioned how it's sort of like, if you have the opportunity and you think you're going to get away with it, then it kind of, someone might think it's okay. And so, Doug, I was wondering, in your experience in politics, did you ever encounter a situation where somebody asked you to use your public position to cross an ethical line or a legal line? And I'm wondering how you handled it, and how do you say no to someone while maintaining the relationships that are so important in Hawaii?
I think if anybody ever got close to that, I would just say, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And I'm actually trying to think if anyone was ever that specific. I mean, to me, I think part of it is kind of how you send out a message in all that you do, when you're in office, that basically says, that's not the way I play. So when you're a prosecutor, you kind of say, that's not how I'm going to be handling it. So I think that tends to deter that kind of conversation from happening. And I think that's the way, anyway, I think that's probably the best way I can say, that kind of situation.
Yeah.
If that situation come up, how I would answer it.
Hold yourself like it would
say
make
no.
the person uncomfortable to even ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Holding yourself out there that way. And then also just, like, even if it got close to something like that, it's just, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important message to say. That's that. I did want to add to this because I think Ali touched on a really good point, which is, because then I think, well, what is it that motivates, the vast majority of people to actually do things correctly? So in other words, for all the bad actors, I can think of a lot of people who are in public office who are well-meaning, and at least to my mind, I think they're well-meaning. I think they're sincere. I think they want to do the right thing. For those people, I would actually say that I think a lot of the transparency initiatives that are suggested by the Foley Commission, that Ali and Heather are saying are great, and these are things that we should focus on. I actually think for that vast majority of well-meaning, sincere people, they're fine with it. Like there's not a problem because they want, if in order for them to serve in public office, they want to have a feeling, out there that, look, everything is above board. There's all these structures and rules in place so that we can't ever have that conversation that you're talking about, Christine. And I think if that kind of structure can be set up, I would actually say my feeling is that a lot of public officials who want to do the right thing would welcome that and be okay with it, because it would actually help them to be able to do their job more effectively.
Yeah. The next question is for both Ali and Doug, since you live here. I'm from New Jersey, where people are sort of known to speak their mind, but here in the islands, I've learned there's a cultural expectation not to talk stink or make waves. What role do you think the island culture plays in perpetuating corruption here? Maybe let's start with Ali.
Yeah, we live in a beautiful state, and we have some fantastic cultural aspects to the state about healing and forgiveness and so forth, which I think are positives. The problem is, and this happened in the 60s, is the establishment gets a hold of these concepts and they corrupt them. And they make them tools to say to people, don't be the nail that sticks out. Don't be loud. If you're loud or rude, then you're rude. And if you're loud, then you're arrogant. I am a I'm from New York. I speak with a New York accent, and in court, I am an aggressive defense attorney. I cross-examine witnesses. I call them liars. And what I found was the juries were actually very receptive because I did it professionally. I did it within the scope of my job. And I always told the jury, I apologize if they felt I was a little bit too aggressive, but it's my job. We can do that in politics. We don't have to look the other way. We can be aggressive. We can be direct. We need to be, because what happens is the establishment uses these concepts and corrupts them and distorts them to make it so that it's bad to speak out. We have a problem in Hawaii. We don't have a lot of whistleblowers. And there's a reason we don't have a lot of whistleblowers. One is just geography. If you're a whistleblower in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, you can move to the other side of the state. You still have your family. You still have a job. You haven't lost the ties to your community. But in Hawaii, if you're a whistleblower, you may have to leave the state. You may have to uproot your family and lose your relatives and lose your, the state that you've lived in your whole life. So we have that problem. We also have the problem, of course, if you're a whistleblower, you're gonna, you could be ostracized within our, the Democratic Party or within the system that we live. So it's a real problem. So we don't have a lot of whistleblowers in Hawaii. And part of it is the establishment suppresses it because it's not in their interest. So we have to figure out a way to get people talking. I mean, all these issues that we've seen, all these cases, hundreds of people knew what were going on and no one really came forward. We have to work within our society and make them want to come forward, make it safe for them to come forward and make it acceptable.
Right.
Doug, your thoughts?
Okay, so I think what Ali said there at the very end, that makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, we're all 2 degrees removed from each other, living on an island. I mean, it's not even, we literally are all, we know somebody who knows somebody, or we know each other directly. And so there's a good side to that it creates a lot of, collaborative events and an atmosphere that where people work together on certain things. But then I think it also creates a reluctance to want to confront or to take anything on. I can only speak to my own personal experience, which is when I grew up, that's exactly what I heard. The nail that sticks up gets struck down. Exactly what I was told by my parents, who I love and who loved me, and they told me this is how you need to conduct yourself to get through life. And so I think if there's anything, whatever little courage that I've had in the things that I've done in my career, it's been because of either mentors or professors or being in environments where people would tell me it's safe to be that way. It's okay to confront. And the more I've heard that and grown through my life and matured, I think I've been able to get my head wrapped around that to feel comfortable with that. And so to me, I think I actually like these dialogues because I think it jolts all of us who kind of grew up, for me, growing up with that kind of mindset, to hear, it's actually safe and it's actually good to be able to speak up about something that you see. I think that's actually very helpful and is helpful to be able to change the discussions that happen in the community so that we do care about these issues and that we do hold people accountable.
Yeah. So we're going to have a new governor and some new legislators in charge after next month's election. I'm wondering what you all think are some specific steps that they should take in the next year to promote government accountability and address corruption. I'd like to start with Heather.
I apologize. I turned off my camera because my internet connection has been a little unstable and you cut out right in the
Oh, it's
middle
okay. I can repeat the question. So I was saying our obviously election is next month. We're going to get a new governor and some new legislators. What specific steps do you think they should take in the next year to promote government accountability and address corruption?
I think that this, going back to what Ali was saying before about the public outcry, right now is a perfect time while these folks are out there running for election. They are, I hope, holding, public forums, town halls. The public needs to bird dog them and ask them, what is their stance going to be? What steps do they want to take? What proactive initiatives are they going to engage in so that they can increase the transparency, increase the accountability? They should be talking about what they're going to do for enforcement. They should be talking about, once, if they are elected, what are they going to do to help rebuild that public trust? And they should start talking about, with the whistleblower protections and different things. There needs to be some different steps that are taken and some best practices that are followed in other states to figure out how whistleblowers don't face retaliation, either in the university question that was posed here in the chat, or if it's at any level of government or in any of these administrations, that they have to take a serious stance. And it should be something that the voters should be demanding of them in order for them to get their vote. I think that's one of the quickest ways to start getting their attention on the issue. And then it needs to be a big media push as well. Like I said, some of the changes that we've been able to do in other states, we have done because of public shaming. It has been, you profess to be a governor of, good ethics and morals and want to have a state that is going to be able to pursue greater opportunities for economic development. One of the number one things that we have found through working with the Center of Economic Development in Virginia, when they did a nationwide study, was called Crony Capitalism. Businesses don't want to come into places where they don't think they're going to get a fair shake, where they think that somehow somebody else is already going to get the contract. So why should they bother? And it's something that hurts every state by not having greater accountability.
Doug, what are your thoughts on some laws or policies the new administration and new legislature should consider?
Well, one of the things that I see happening at the Attorney General's office is that they've started a new, public corruption division or team that's going to be, trying to, focus on public corruption and focus on trying to prosecute those things. I actually think that's a really good step, because one of the things that we talked about earlier, I don't know if it's so much that people lack political will to go after these things, but I do agree 100% that prosecuting a white collar public corruption crime is 10 times harder than your blue collar crime. So in other words, if you're looking at the possible priorities on your desk, can I prosecute this robbery that has one witness that is going to show up in court, or am I going to be looking at thousands of pages of receipts and trying to connect the dots to a credit card statement and to an event that took place that day, and putting it all together into a timeline? That takes a lot of effort, so I think what the new governor could be doing is to be saying, they support that effort because it's going to cost staff time in order to be able to go after something like that. I would also say the other thing that I think the new governor can do, and I've seen this from the Governor Ige's cabinet I got to serve in, and Mayor Carlisle's cabinet, is just sending that message to the cabinet from the very beginning. So internally, saying, look, guys, this is what this is how our cabinet's going to conduct ourselves. We're not going to be subject to these things. And anyway, I think, that kind of message, will it cure all evils? No, but just saying it helps the cabinet to be aware this is a priority to the boss. And so I would hope and I would expect our next governor to do something like that. And I think they will. I think, I'm hopeful that these guys are going to, make this an effort, and I just hope that they really underscore it.
Allie, what are your thoughts on what you'd like to see in the next year from our politicians?
Yeah, I mean, from the governor, I agree with the comments that have been made that, we take our lead from the head guy. And in this case, the governor could send a really strong message through his own cabinet and to the legislature that he'll be open to change. He'll be open to these bills. They need to stop, the governor needs to stop vetoing the few bills for transparency and for accountability that actually make it out of the Senate and the House here. So that has to happen first because there aren't many of them and the excuses are pretty lame. But, again, I go back to my, 30,000 foot view. We need to address this issue from every angle all at once to keep the pressure on, not only to the governor, but to the legislature. And that means trying to get bills passed, transparency, accountability, put pressure from all angles, get public demonstrations involved, get Common Cause to talk about best practices, and hit them all at once, all the time, because it is not going to change in this state unless something radical happens. I don't believe that, it's just good people coming in, because I do believe these are good people, but the system so far has shown it won't change. We have to address it. We have the opportunity. The cases that are happening now, if these people are convicted and if they're sentenced, gives us that momentum for change. We need to grab that momentum and use it.
All right. I have a couple quick questions about laws that could be proposed. We touched on whistleblowers. Are there any models nationally, Heather, for whistleblower protection when it comes to corruption?
I think there might be a few, and I have to preface this by, saying that none are without flaw. I'll put it that way, especially when you're dealing with a very small system where everybody knows everybody. But I think that, the protections that we put in to create a reporting mechanism where you don't have to have something notarized, but you can't make something anonymous. But a lot of this also requires putting in the structure that can receive a complaint that will also protect the anonymity of the individual who is doing the whistleblowing to begin with. And so both things have to be true in order to have an effective whistleblower policy. So I don't know if I can point to one, because it seems like we need to have the other and the infrastructure set up at the exact same time in order to make that possible.
All right. In just the final few minutes, I'd like to give you each, 30 seconds of final remarks. Allie, do you want to close us off?
Yeah, I know this has been kind of a doom and gloom discussion and topic. And I go back to what Doug said in the beginning. We're not talking about 90% of the politicians. And it's true with criminals.
Right.
I work in the criminal field and you think everybody's a criminal. It's not. It's a smaller percentage of people that are, but because we're dealing with this and we see it in the news all the time, it just seems like it's overwhelming. And what I think is possible, and I know this from other times in history and from watching other states, we can make a difference. We can create change. It can be a positive outcome, but it takes work from a lot of different people from a lot of different places. It's not doom and gloom. We're not stuck in this horrible age of corruption. We can make a difference if we do it.
All right, Heather, any final thoughts?
I sense a tipping point. It really feels like all of these cases have really piled up to enough where it should feel like to any elected official right now that if they walk into a grocery store, somebody's asking about what they're going to do to fix something. This has to be, and that's one of the benefits of having, a legislature and accessible public officials. You run into them all the time in your neighborhoods. Bring it up. I think hounding them and having this be in their face every time they turn around and not giving them any space to get away from it will probably drive them, if anything, just to get away from hearing about it. And it doesn't matter how we get there, but I do feel like the public outrage is at that tipping point that Hawaii really needs to be able to have the governor, I think, not just say, because I agree with you, Allie, I think having them being open to it, but also they can't veto it. The way that I've seen this best work in some of these structures is they have to demand that the legislature bring them a package of change that meets the following criteria. And that's what they have to go for.
Right. And Doug, really briefly, before I have to hand it over to Roger.
No, Allie, thank you so much for the book that you wrote and for your advocacy. Heather, thanks for so much for giving a national perspective. Christina, thank you for the questions that you ask and for the stories that you write, and appreciate everybody for participating in this panel. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Roger, take us home.
Yeah, that was a terrific panel. I don't think I've seen that many comments in the chat ever before. So we've obviously hit a nerve with this. We don't have many panels like this. Maybe we should have more. Anyway, I want to thank you very much and thank the attendees for attending. And I have a final pitch by order of my chair, which is that we desperately want to be in person next year, and it takes a lot of funding. And we have a fundraiser on January the 26th. And I hope you'll put it in your calendar, and I'll be reminding everyone about this endlessly for the rest of this month and beyond. Again, thank you so much. It was an excellent panel. Aloha.
Thanks, everyone. Aloha.
Aloha.